Welcome, folks. My name is George Wright, and this is an Orange People's News Update. We're streaming live today from mpeg2video in Plymouth, New Hampshire. With me here today, I have Jack Savage from the New Hampshire Society for Protection of New Hampshire Forest. How are you doing, Jack? Good afternoon.
Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you very much.
There's a little bit of turmoil going on out here about what's going on up in Stewartstown and Clarksville with Route 3 and some crossings.
Right.
Can you give us a little update on that and what's going on?
I'll do my best, George. So I think many of your viewers probably know that Northern Pass announced a revised route back on June 27th. And that route still includes more than 1,000 towers running across 187 miles of New Hampshire. Some of the changes were they proposed to bury underground two short sections, one about 7.5 miles and the other about a half a mile, up in northern New Hampshire, in Clarksville and then in Stewartstown. And then proceed from there down to the Coos Loop, cross another new section of the White Mountain National Forest, cross another one of our forest reservations, the Kaufman Forest, on its way to Groveton, where they hope to pick up the so-called existing right-of-way that PSNH has some rights to, and proceeding there down through the primary section of the White Mountain National Forest to Franklin, and then from Franklin, the conversion station, down through Concord and over to Deerfield. 187 miles total. So when we first heard about the route announcement, we took some time to take a closer look and study and understand exactly what the proposal entailed, and also to go back and check our knowledge of some of the ownerships and rights that we have. And come to find out, or come to confirm, is that up on Route 3, and those folks who have traveled up to Pittsburgh know that you go from Colebrook up through West Stewartstown and Clarksville and into Pittsburgh, and you enter Pittsburgh by crossing a green bridge across the Connecticut River. And that's right at the spot where Northern Pass hopes to come overhead from the Canadian border, drop down, and then underground south along Route 3, underneath the Connecticut River, under through a longer section of Route 3 onto other land that they own. What we confirmed is that, in fact, the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forest owns not only both sides of Route 3 along that stretch, but also the land underneath the road, and including the ground underneath the river, the Connecticut River, to the halfway mark of the river. And so, in effect, what we see happening is that a private commercial development is proposing to build something underneath or on ground that we own, without giving us any indication, certainly without asking us, of how they propose to do so. And that raises any number of questions. The most significant to us is, by exactly what means would they get access to this land without somebody, some government entity, exerting some form of eminent domain? It's unclear to us or our attorneys how they could do this without exerting some form of eminent domain.
They filed the papers with the DOE for their routes. They put down one route which includes what you own, and another alternate route, which is the one they have with plans to go through the Connecticut headwaters. Now, if what you're saying is fact and true, then the paperwork that they filed should be invalid. It shouldn't stand because they can't go under your land. I mean, is that true? That should be void?
That's the question that we're asking, and so that raises the next question: is if you don't have site control, if you're a private developer, let's say, George, you wanted to build a housing development, and you wanted to go to the planning board and to the building inspector and apply for the requisite permits in order to do that development. Well, the planning board or the code enforcement officer would require you to show that you had some rights to the land on which you're proposing to build your development, either an agreement with the true landowner or the fact that you have deeded rights to that land. In this case, Northern Pass has neither. So either they haven't done their homework, or they're just proceeding with a sense of entitlement that is really truly incredible. And that leads us to the question of, if they do not have site control, if they cannot show how they would make use of our land, should an entity like the Department of Energy, a federal entity, accept their application as complete? And I think that's a fair question that people, before the DOE holds additional scoping hearings for the environmental impact statement, before the DOE does anything else, they should take a look at that and ask the developer, how do you propose to do that? And we and other landowners who are in the same situation as we are, by the way, deserve a prompt and specific answer.
I'm thinking back a week or two ago, and I read an article by Martin Murray, I believe. He's a spokesperson, where he said, we're gonna run the wires underground on Route 3, whether you like it or not. Is that true? I mean, I remember something to that effect, that he said that they are going to do that.
From public statements that Mr. Murray and Mr. McDermott, representing Northern Pass, they both work for PSNH. In this case, it would appear that they're being spokespeople for Northern Pass LLC. They've represented that they think that they have somehow the right or ability to site their private transmission line, Northern Pass's private transmission line, along those right-of-ways. But that's at the crux of our question. By what means would you in fact do that? What regulations, what siting permit procedure would you do that? And how would you do that on land we own without some form of a taking?
Bringing up the Connecticut headwaters again.
Right. Okay.
Now they have put that back in their paperwork with their proposal for a route.
Mm-hmm.
When I think they've been told in no uncertain terms that they can't use it. That the governor and Jeff Rose and they're not going to allow them to use it.
Right. So I think you know, George, that their intended route, as they spent upwards of $40 million or more to acquire land in order to put their overhead towers. And note that they understood when they were paying, in one case, $4 million for 20 acres of land. They understood very well how important it was for them to own the fee ownership in order to put their infrastructure. So at that point, they seemed to understand that they needed to own it in order to build it. And here we are, now they're proposing to build it on land we own, and it sounds maybe like they've changed their tune. But anyways, you know, they spent a lot of money for an intended route, and they, once again, didn't quite do their research or their homework 100%, and they found themselves into a corner in which they would have to cross a section of the Connecticut Lake's headwaters, which is conserved land. It's an easement that does not allow for commercial development of that kind. Does not allow to bury commercial development. And consequently, it was the opinion of most that this kind of project would not be allowed under or on or across the Connecticut Lake's headwaters, which to a certain extent took that route off the table. Nonetheless, Northern Pass, in their filing with the Department of Energy, has included that as an alternative. And so one has to, one could speculate and ask the question, is their burial proposal, are they really serious about that? Is that a serious proposal, or do they know very well that that's really too steep of a hill to climb, and they still have some hopes of possibly finding a way to breach that Connecticut Lake's headwaters easement? I will say that we're very confident that that won't happen. If they go to court to make it happen, I think we will be there to fight it every step of the way. And that's a battle we would not like to fight, but we are not afraid of it at all. We think we would end up victorious there.
If this does go to court and you do fight them in a legal lawsuit as members of your organization and supporting you all these years, would it be possible, would it be become a class action lawsuit with I mean, I don't know how to word that,
Right,
but...
sure. So I guess what you're asking is you and others who feel you have a stake, whether as a landowner or a member of the Forest Society or a donor to one of our land protection campaigns, could you join some sort of class action suit against Northern Pass for their transgressions? Yeah, we've had other people ask us that question. Other communities ask that question. Can various entities band together in order to fight this legally? And it's probably a little premature to answer that question with any in any definitive way. I think it's premature to determine now where a legal intersection with the process might be most advantageous, whether it's through the SEC process or through seeking an injunction or some other way. We'll evaluate those potentialities as time goes on, and we presumably will seek out other partners. You got to remember, George, I think you know this, that there's no other conservation or environmental organizations who are supportive of Northern Pass at all. The AMC has fought very much against this. The Conservation Law Foundation is very much against this proposal. There are other organizations out there who are very much against us. And all of those organizations are very supportive of the notion that when you conserve land, as with our Washburn Family Forest, as with the Connecticut Lakes Headwaters, as with the Washington, this National Forest, as with our Rocks Estate, as with easements held by towns along the route, there's a certain sanctity to that. That's meant to be in perpetuity. And the purpose of it was to prevent further subdivision and commercial development. So when a private developer comes forward and says, we want to do this, or in Northern Pass's case, we're going to do this, and here's the timeline we're going to do it, and quite frankly, the arrogance is stunning.
To say the least.
Those organizations who have fought for years, in the case of us and the National Forest, that was something we worked on as part of our founding over 100 years ago. And so you can be certain that we will look for everyone to come together and fight that. And if we have to end up fighting in court, we will. I'd like to think that public opinion will prevail, and that the Forest Society's intent, which is to compel Northern Pass to look at other viable alternatives, will ultimately prevail before we ever get into court or into a more specific permitting process.
I don't see that happening. I don't. They're just, I don't want to use the words, but they seem to think that they can just walk all over New Hampshire, they can walk all over anybody they want, do as they please.
There is that sense of entitlement in their words and actions, I agree. And I think it's pretty evident by now why that is. They have strung together a distribution right-of-way that they would like to monetize. It's an opportunity from their standpoint to take an asset presumably that was acquired through funds from the ratepayers, by the way, and monetize it by essentially licensing it to a third party, Hydro-Quebec. And so it's clear they want to, and I think it's pretty clear why they want to. It has very little to do with clean energy or renewable energy or the need for energy or anything like that. It has everything to do with good old profit. And you can't blame them for that. That's what America was built on, was the drive to make money. But it shouldn't be done at the cost of everyone else. It shouldn't be done to the cost of our landscape. It shouldn't be done to the cost of individual private landowners. It shouldn't be done at the cost of what so many people value so deeply about New Hampshire.
Now, you mentioned a couple of other easements that you have up there, Forest Society easements, and you mentioned that that's where they plan to go across those two?
Right, so I think you're probably referring to our Kaufman Forest, and that's not an easement, that's a full fee ownership. We own the land, it's in Stark. And the Coas Loop, which is a PSNH controlled other distribution line, passes through it. It's a 150-foot right-of-way, so in that regard it's not unlike further down in the south where there's existing right-of-way. And once again, they hope to use that. The pipeline also goes underneath that, and so there's electrical lines there, there's a pipeline there, and they hope to wedge in their private transmission line as well.
That's not going to happen?
Well, we're doing everything we can to make sure it doesn't happen. I think it's clear that they think that they don't need to ask anybody to do that. I think we would beg to differ.
It's unbelievable. They're just brazen to be pushing forward like this without doing their homework.
It's a lot of money, George.
I know it's a lot of money.
We're talking about billions and billions of dollars, and therein lies the question. This is fundamentally a project of Hydro-Quebec in partnership with Northeast Utilities. PSNH is a subsidiary of NU. And Hydro-Quebec very much wants to sell more electricity to southern New England. And there's billions of dollars at stake if they can do that. And so they have not spared the purse in attempting to find their way. The question it raises is whether Hydro-Quebec should be made to bury the line in its entirety. And the only objection that the Northern Pass representatives come up with against that is one of cost. And I think many people feel like they overestimate the cost of what it would take to bury it, and they minimize Hydro-Quebec's potential and interest. Here's one thing I will say. When Northern Pass, as proposed, goes away, when it's made clear to them that they will not be able to use their 140 miles existing right-of-way, Hydro-Quebec will be back the next day proposing to bury it along with our transportation corridors. That's the amount of money that's in it for them. And so make no mistake, if we in New Hampshire yield to this, we will have missed an opportunity to require a Crown Corporation of Canada to do what they need to do in order to protect our landscape.
Well, I have one thing to say about that. With the profits and the money, PSNH may have the power of the dollar, but here in New Hampshire we have the power of the people. And we will band together and we will support anything we have to do to stop this line from going forward as it is proposed, as we have been doing in the past. And I'm sure the Forest Society deserves a great amount of credit for doing what they're doing to help this fight.
Well, thank you, George.
And our hearts go out to the Forest Society.
Yeah, of course, we hold our land in the public trust, and we depend on our 10,000 member households and all of the people who have contributed to our Balsams campaign, to our campaign to put additional easements blocking Northern Pass up north, and all of the people across the state. What has been very heartwarming for us is a number of people from down the southern tier of the state who have come forward and made it known to us through their words and through their actions by donating to our campaign and all that kind of thing, that they think this idea stinks.
It does stink. Is there anything new you can tell us, Jack? Anything coming up before we close? Or?
Well, we would certainly encourage people, Northern Pass is staging these open houses over the next few weeks, and in Millsfield, and then in Stewartstown and Stark and Groveton. And local residents and local landowners should show up, and they should ask questions. They should demand that PSNH and Northern Pass explain themselves. Do they really have no respect for private property? Do they really think that they ought to be able to use eminent domain? And if you have other questions about the safety of what they're proposing, or about the damage that the large-scale hydro dams are doing up in Canada, if you have those kinds of concerns or questions, you should go up and you should ask them about it and make your feelings clear.
Absolutely. Okay, I want to thank you for being here, Jack, and we got a lot of information, and I hope you folks out there in the audience will join the battle. Get a hold of one of your local groups. There's a bunch of them around. Go on nonorthernpass.org. Bury the Northern Pass. Get a hold of Jack at the Forest Society, and let's win this battle. Okay. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, George. Appreciate it very much.